Did I just find the best benchtop planer? Let's find out. Now, before I talk to you about the specifics of this planer, really quickly, just quick brush up course on what a planer is and isn't, just so we're all on the same page. A planer takes the thickness of any material, mostly, lumber or a board, and it takes that thickness and shrinks it. So if I have a board that's this thick, I can run it through the planer and I can take that thickness of the board down. When I first started woodworking, I didn't even know that planers existed. I'm talking about back when I was like 14, and I thought that if you wanted to make boards thinner, you just had to sand for a long time. And thank goodness someone invented the planer, so that is not the case. You can also use planers to take warp or a cup out of a board. So let's say you have a board that's bent like this, that's called a cup. When you run that through a planer, it's going to start shaving away at those high spots and those low spots until you have a thinner but straight board. And that is really, really nice, especially if you're milling your own lumber, because you're going to get boards that come out of the kiln that might have a cup. There's other jigs you can use to take like rocks out of boards, or I guess twists out of boards. Technically, a jointer is used to do that, but there's a jig that I talked about before in this video. I'll leave a link right up here if you want to hear more about that, about how I joint boards with a planer. But yeah, you can basically use different jigs with a planer to mill boards to make them perfectly square, perfectly flat, take out any cups in them, stuff like that. That's what a planer is. So now we're going to get into the specifics of this planer. This is the DeWalt DW734 Planer, and today I'm going to give you my honest feedback on whether you should buy this planer or not. DeWalt did not send me this planer for free. I paid full price for this several years back, actually. DeWalt has no idea I'm making this video. So these are my 100% honest thoughts. A couple of quick notes about this planer. This is a 12.5-inch wide planer, so you can basically mill down material 12.5 inches, or maybe a little bit narrower than that, all the way down to 1 or 2 inches or whatever you want to mill down. The table length going this way from this infeed table, the end of this infeed table, to the back end of the outfeed table is 33.5 inches, which is actually, for a benchtop planer, I think pretty good. This is a 15 amp planer. It plugs into like a normal wall outlet that you'll have in your shop. You don't have to rewire your shop to accommodate for the power of this planer. As far as features go on this DeWalt planer, they're pretty much standard. You've got your adjustments, your thickness adjustment right here. They do give you this scale on the side, but I would not really trust that. I would probably get some really accurate calipers so you can know how thick your material is coming out, but you do have this gauge on the side if you want it. As a general rule of thumb, a quarter turn on this knob at the top is going to take off 1/64th of an inch of material. In case you're wondering, what I normally do when I'm planing is I'll do a quarter turn at a time. So do a quarter turn, pass the board through a planer, quarter turn, pass the board through a planer, quarter turn, pass the board through the planer. If you get too aggressive, that can lead to kickback with your material. You don't want to try and take off like a 1/16th of an inch at a time, especially with this planer. On the end of the planer, there's a little knob that says 0, 3/4, 1/2, and 1/4. And what this is this allows you to mill boards down to a consistent thickness repeatedly, basically. So if you want to get a bunch of boards down to 1/2 inch thick, all you have to do is set that knob to 1/2 inch and keep on lowering your cutter head and passing the boards through until your cutter head stops. When it stops, it's stopping at 1/2 inch thickness. You do the same thing with a 1/4 inch, do the same thing with 3/4 inch, or if maybe you're milling something down that's going to be really thin, you want to go ahead and set that down to 0. I think that's a really nice feature that probably a lot of people don't know about. I don't know if that's on other benchtop planers, but it's on this one, and it's come in handy for me in the past. Had situations where I couldn't lower my cutter head, and I was like, what in the world? Why won't this go down any lower? And it was set on 3/4. So just something to know about in case you get this planer. Now, when it comes to the cutter head, this doesn't have helical cutter heads, and you can't upgrade two helical cutter heads for this particular planer like you can the nicer DeWalt planer. What this has is a cutter head that has 3 straight knives, 12.5 inches long. Now, one nice thing about these knives is that they are reversible. And so before you go to replace them, you want to make sure that you have reversed them, if that makes sense. So there's 2 sides. So once you've put in some new knives, you're running material through, whenever those knives get dull, you can reverse them and they're good as new, run it through, and then you'll have to buy your replacements. So definitely not as nice as the helical cutter head, but you know, you're paying for this planer at a lower price point. So I think that kind of balances out. The main other features that this planer has is, of course, right here. This is your locking mechanism for whenever you want to lock your planer cutter head in place. You always, you know, it's best practice to do that. There's definitely been times when I've run boards through this without locking this down because I'm taking maybe 16 or 20 passes, and you know, it just can be a lot to lock that down, unlock it, adjust, lock. But that probably is best practice because you don't want this cutter head moving. But once again, I haven't really had any issues with that. Right here's your on-off switch. That's pretty self-explanatory. I do like one thing about this on-off switch is it's really big. I've seen some other, even jointers that have like these little switches that you tap on and tap off. I don't like that as much. I like kind of this big panel that you can, especially when you're turning it off really quickly, just knock it off and it cuts power to the planer. I think that's really, really good. Right here you have your fuse reset. I think that's what it's called. I'll be honest, I have watched a lot of reviews on this planer, and a lot of people say, this planer, you're always having to reset the fuse. You're always having to reset the fuse. It's always shorting out when I try to run bigger materials through this planer. And I've run some pretty hefty stuff through this planer. I mean, I'm talking about live edge, 3-inch thick slabs through this planer, and I have never once had to do this little reset here, okay? Not in the history of like the 5 or 6 years of me using this planer. So, like I said, I've seen a lot of reviews that knock on this planer because you're always having to reset that. I'm just telling you from my experience, I have never once had to reset this little fuse thing here. On the back of this planer, it's got a 4-inch dust collection port. The dust collection on this planer, in my opinion, is actually really, really good. I hooked this planer up to a Powermatic dust collector that I have in my shop, and the hose goes from the Powermatic dust collector right here to the back of this planer. And there's always some, I can show you the floor here in a second. There's always some chips that maybe fall down and this planer doesn't collect, but for the most part, dust collection on this is really, really good. At least in my opinion, considering the fact that this is a entry-level benchtop planer. So right now you're watching all the different times that I've used a planer on the channel. Like I said, this planer, I've had it for longer than I've even been making YouTube videos, and it has held up so well. For what it is, a benchtop entry-level planer, I think this is an amazing tool. It has lasted me for a great amount of time. It's sturdy, it's accurate. I'd say it's very accurate for a benchtop planer. It has served me so well using it for so many different projects. I mean, I've put this planer through the ringer. I couldn't tell you how many even knives I've used in this planer. Probably 5 or 6, probably 7 pairs of knives by now. And it just continues to perform. It continues to hold up. I never really worry about this tool. I will say that I'm planning on, in the coming weeks, replacing this planer with the upgraded DeWalt planer. I think it's the DW735. And that's the planer that you can upgrade and add the helical head cutter head to and make some other cool upgrades to. The only reason I'm doing this is because I want to give you my thoughts on that planer. And so my plan is probably to sell this one, buy the upgraded one, so you guys can know my thoughts on that planer as well. But I love this planer. If I decide to sell it, it's not because it's a bad planer, and DeWalt is not paying me to say that. If you're interested in seeing my thoughts on the DeWalt DW735 planer once I get it, be sure to subscribe because I'm always bringing you guys not only reviews on planers, but on tons of different woodworking tools from lots of different brands. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. But my final thoughts on this DeWalt planer are this. If you are in the market for a planer, let's say you have the basic tools like a router, drill, circular saw, table saw, jigsaw, but you have not gotten into milling lumber at all, and you're ready to buy a jointer or a planer, I would say first, buy a planer before you buy a jointer. I would highly recommend that. And I would really recommend this planer to you. It's high quality. It's, it's accurate enough. It gives you enough width of what you need for most projects. It's just an all-around great planer. I really can't recommend it enough. There's links down in the description to this planer, the cutter head knives, all those kind of things. So there's great stuff in the description for you, but I would highly recommend this planer. Hey, if you've enjoyed this video, check out one of these two videos. I do some other tool reviews here, and I'd love to see you in one of these videos.